Inside the Dragon Age debacle that gutted EA's BioWare studio. This is an article in the Bloomberg by Jason Schreier. The latest game in BioWare's fantasy role-playing series went through 10 years of development turmoil. So, you all know about Veilguard by now, I hope, about how it was a massive failure, about how it cost EA millions of dollars, and it cost a lot of the BioWare developers their jobs as well. So we're going to dive into this article and see if there's anything new, anything that can enlighten us on more on the situation. In early November, on the eve of the crucial holiday shopping season, staffers at the video game studio BioWare were feeling optimistic. After an excruciating development cycle, they had finally released their latest game, Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and early reception was largely positive. Largely. The role-playing game was topping sales charts on Steam, and solid, if not spectacular, reviews were rolling in. Really, if I remember, it was mixed, which is bad. Like, generally on Steam, you want very positive or overwhelmingly positive. That's how you know it's a good game, typically. But in the weeks that followed, the early buzz cooled as players delved deeper into the fantasy world, and some BioWare employees grew anxious. For months, everyone at the subsidiary of the video game publisher EA has been under intense pressure. The studio's previous two games, Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, had flopped, and there were rumors that if Dragon Age underperformed, BioWare might become another of EA's many casualties. Not long after Christmas, the bad news surfaced. EA announced in January that the new Dragon Age had only reached 1.5 million players. Players, by the way, not sales. Players. This happened recently with Doom the Dark Ages. Everyone was like, oh my god, 3 million players, it's such a huge success. In reality, 2.2 million of those players, I believe it was, 2.2 million of them were on Game Pass. 2.2 million of them didn't actually buy the goddamn game. So the actual sales were about 800,000. And if we're going off that math, just like ratio, that would mean 1.5 million players. That would mean this game, if it correlates with Doom the Dark Ages, probably sold 400,000 at that time. I could be off, but that's just my guessing based on the previous data we've seen from game sales or Game Pass players. So player count versus actual sales. Quick tangent there. Sorry about that. The holiday performance of another recently released title, EA Sports FC 2025, was also subpar, compounding the problem. Yeah, EA's been having a rough time. As a result of the struggling titles, EA Chief Executive Officer Andrew Wilson explained the company would be significantly lowering its sales forecast for the fiscal year ahead. EA's shared price promptly plunged 18%. Damn. Dragon Age had a high-quality launch and was well-received. Hey, cat. Sorry, I have a cat on my desk. Let me just put it in my lap. By critics and those who played. Wilson later said on an earnings call, however, it did not resonate with the broad enough audience in this highly competitive market. Uh-oh. There it is. There's the trap. Guys, we just didn't reach a large enough audience. If we catered to everyone, if we made a product for everyone, surely it would have sold well. But we all know, if you make a product for everyone, if you make a product that appeals to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. That we've seen that time and time again. So that might be the story here. But we'll see. Days after the sales revision, EA laid off a chunk of BioWare's staff at the studio headquarters in Edmonton, Canada, and permanently transferred many of the remaining workers to other divisions. Sorry, I have to get the cat cam going here while he's sitting on my lap. There, you can kind of see him down there. All right, sorry about that. Where was I? For the storied 30-year-old gamer market, it was a stunning fall that left many fans wondering how things had gone so haywire and what might come next for the stricken studio. According to interviews with nearly 24 people who worked on Dragon Age: The Veilguard, there were several reasons behind its failure, including marketing misfires, poor word of mouth, and a 10-year gap since the previous title. I mean, those are all symptoms of the problem, and the problem is that the game was trash, with identity politics interwoven within, not very subtle either. Above all, sources point to rebooting of the product from a single-player game to a multiplayer one, and then back again, a switcheroo that muddled development and inflated the title's budget. They say ultimately setting the stage for EA's potentially unrealistic sales expectations. A spokesperson for EA declined to comment. So, just to go back, they said that sources point to them, rebooting the product from single player to multiplayer and then back. So 100% what happened here is that stakeholders were like, and investors were like, hey, let's make a multiplayer game. Look how well Fortnite's doing. Look all these BRs. We got to cash in on that market. But it's BioWare. They make single player games. They make role-playing fantasy games and like sci-fi game. Mass Effect, Dragon Age. They appeal to a completely different market. So they abandoned that market and tried to get another market by trying to appeal to everyone. It seems like that's what happened here. The union between BioWare and EA started off with lofty aspirations. In 2007, EA executives announced they were acquiring BioWare and another gaming studio in a deal worth $860 million. And that's back in 2007. $860 million. Nowadays, that's got to be what, $2 billion from inflation? The goal was to diversify their slate of games, which was heavy in sports titles like Madden and NFL, and light in the kind of adventure and role-playing games that BioWare was known for. Yep, we all know what's happening here. They hire a studio, and instead of having the studio develop games that, they're familiar with and passionate about, they're going to force them to do something they don't want to do, and it's going to be trash. Initially, it looked like a smart move, thanks to a string of big hits. In 2014, BioWare released Dragon Age Inquisition, the third installment in a popular action series, dropping players in a semi-open world full of magic, elves, and fire-spewing dragons. Now, full transparency, I didn't play Inquisition. I heard it was okay. The only Dragon Age game I played, and loved by the way, was Dragon Age Origin. That was a great game. Old game. Good role-playing game, though. But quick tangent, just wanted to say that. The third installment in a popular action series, dropping players in a semi-open world full of magic, elves, and fire-spewing dragons. The fantasy title went on to win the much-coveted Game of the Year award and sell 12 million copies. Oh, compare that to Veilguard. Did Veilguard even sell 500,000? I'd be curious, because I don't think they've released the sales numbers. I know they've released player count, but that's completely different. According to its executive producer, Mark Dara, a major validation of EA's diversification strategy. Before long, Dara and Mike Laidlaw, the creative director, began kicking around ideas for the next Dragon Age installment, codename Joplin, aiming for a game that would be smaller in scope, but before much could get done, BioWare shifted the studio's focus to more pressing titles coming down the pike. Okay. 2017. Gosh, this must have been such a long process for them to even get this shitty game Veilguard out, because we're still back in 2017 in this article. BioWare released Mass Effect Andromeda, the fourth installment in a big budget action series set in space. I just remember this game. I remember I watched a Video Game Donkey video, and the main character, the female main character, looked like, I don't know, she just looked derpy. I don't know how to describe it. She looked extremely derpy. Like they picked just the most inoffensive, bland, kind of not ugly but not attractive character. Very strange choice. Unlike its critically successful predecessors, the game received mediocre reviews and was widely mocked by fans. A few months after the disappointing release, the head of BioWare stepped down and was soon replaced by Microsoft Inc.'s Casey Hudson, an alumni of BioWare's early formative years. Like much of the industry, EA's executives were growing increasingly enamored of so-called live service games. Here we go. Are they going to say that they were forced to do live service? Because that is what happened. I remember Anthem, such as Destiny and Overwatch, in which players continue to engage with and spend money on a title for months or even years after its initial release. With EA aiming to make a splash in the fast-growing category, BioWare poured resources into Anthem, a live service shooter game that checked all the right boxes. Well, it may have checked some boxes, but no one played the goddamn game. One day, in October 2017, Laidlaw summoned his colleagues into a conference room and pulled out a few pricey bottles of whiskey. The next Dragon Age sequel, he told them, would also be pivoting to an online live service game. Oh no. Imagine. Like, anyone could look at that idea and say that is a terrible, terrible idea. If you ask any of the fans of the Dragon Age games if they should make the next Dragon Age game live service, I would say, I mean, I'm sure there would be some people, like 1% of the people who would troll and say yes. But 99% of them are going to say, no, it should not be live service. But they made it live service. And then they went back on it and made it single player again, as they mentioned earlier in the article. But let's keep going. Let's keep going. This is a long article. Sorry, I got a cat on my desk now. I got to kind of work around him. The decision from above that he disagreed with. He was resigning from the studio. The assembled staff stayed late through the night, drinking and reminiscing about the franchise they loved. Yeah, that truly was the end of Dragon Age at that point. When they were like, "Yay, guys, how about we make Dragon Age live service?" They're like, "Oh God, it's over." Drank themselves into oblivion and went home and tried to forget. I wish that pivot had never occurred. Yep. Darrow would later recount on YouTube, EA said, "Make this a live service," we said. "We don't know how to do that. We should basically start the project over." I mean, yeah, they make single-player role-playing games, and they're like, "Hey, see how well Fortnite's doing? Let's go do that with Dragon Age." It's unbelievable. Former art director Matt Goldman replaced Laidlaw as creative director, and with a tiny team began pushing ahead on a new multiplayer version of Dragon Age codename Morrison. While everyone else helped to finish Anthem, which was struggling to coalesce, Goldman pushed for a pulpy, more light-hearted tone than previous entries, which suited an online game but was a drastic departure from the dark dynamic stories that fans loved in the fantasy series. My cat is pushing my screen and moving my camera. So yeah, there it is. That kind of answers why Dragon Age the Veilguard is so like goofy and kind of has, you know, that Marvel quippy writing, if you know what I mean. Because they were trying to make it more, what was the word they used? Pulpy. In February 2019, BioWare released Anthem. Reviews were scathing. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Scathing, calling the game tedious and convoluted. Fans were similarly displeased. On social media, players demanded to know why a studio renowned for beloved stories and characters had made an online shooter with a scattershot narrative. That's a great question, but we all know why. Because the shareholders and board members were like, "Hey, Fortnite's doing well, we gotta do one of those." And then they tanked the whole studio because of it. In the wake of BioWare's second consecutive flop, the multiplayer version of Dragon Age continued to take shape. While the previous games in the franchise had featured tactical combat, this one would be all action. This is another thing that I see all the time. These companies are like, "Hey, people don't like turn-based combat. They don't like strategy. Everyone just wants action combat where you can just spam a button and beat the game. Everyone's an idiot now." It's like, and then you see Baldur's Gate 3. Huge success. Guess what? That's D&D based combat. That's classic RPG combat, turn-based strategy. And that game sold insanely well. People loved it. There is a massive audience for turn-based strategy games. But people just have this like disposition in their mind like, "Oh, Zoomers don't want to do that. They want to play Fortnite and action games." It's like there's still, even if Zoomers don't, which I don't really know, again, there's still a massive fucking audience for these games. Just look at Baldur's Gate 3. Oh, sorry, where was I? In the wake of BioWare's consecutive flop, blah, 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 while the previous game in the franchise featured tactical combat, here I was. This would be all action. Instead of quests that players would only experience once, it would be full of missions that could be replayed repeatedly with friends and strangers. Oh boy, daily quests. Everyone loves daily quests, right? The same quest over and over. Oh, important characters couldn't die because they had to persist for multiple players across never-ending gameplay. That's also a bummer when you have, I mean, this is kind of a staple of a lot of RPG games, but you have NPCs that are essential and can't be killed. You might think of Bethesda games like Fallout 3. There's certain NPCs you can't kill, I believe, in New Vegas, stuff like that, like quest NPCs. But it's always very endearing, I find, when the game lets you do that and break the game and forces you to reload. But anyways, as the game evolved over the next 2 years, the failure of Anthem hovered over the studio. Were they making the same mistakes? Some BioWare employees scoffed that they were simply building Anthem with dragons. Oh boy, that's not a good sign. Throughout 2020, the pandemic disrupted the game's already fraught development. In December, Hudson, the head of the studio, and Dara, the head of the franchise, resigned. Shortly thereafter, Gary McKay, BioWare's new studio head, revealed yet another shift in strategy. Oh boy, here we go, another shift. Right after making a shift. Cat, could you... He keeps rubbing his cheek on my monitor and pushing it a little. Moving forward, the dragon... Alright, I'm... Come on, cat. Come on. I'm getting you. You're moving back to my lap. The next Dragon Age would no longer be multiplayer. We were thinking, does this make sense? Does this play into our strengths? Or is this going to be another challenge we have to face? McKay later told Bloomberg News, no, we need to go back to what we're really great at. So here he's referring to the fact that they were making a single player RPG game, as they always do, and then they were told, no, make a live service game. And now they're saying, okay, we need to go back to actually making a single player RPG game. This is not going to work out. In theory, the revision back to Dragon Age's tried and true single player format should have been welcome news inside BioWare. But there was a catch. Typically, this kind of pivot would be coupled with a reset and a period of pre-production, allowing the designers to formulate a new vision for the game. I mean, yeah, they're being told to make a completely different game, and then they're being told to actually go back and make a completely different game that you were originally going to make after years of development on this game. So they're just shooting themselves in the foot. But this is kind of the death of a lot of these things that I've learned from my time working in tech, is that management generally doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, but they have to take their orders from shareholders and higher ups. So, and then it trickles down to the workers, have to bear the brunt of all this shit, and then you end up with the worst product anyway. So that's pretty much exactly what's happening here. Instead, the team was asked to change the game's fundamental structure and recast the entire story on the fly. Okay, yeah, that's not going to work out. That is not going to work out. They were given a year and a half to finish and told to aim for as wide of a market as possible. There it is. There it fucking is. The death kiss of the video game industry. Appeal to as wide a market as possible. But, as I said earlier in this video, if you were listening, if you were paying attention, if you were taking notes, if you appeal to as many people as possible, what's a better way of saying this? I think the way I said it earlier was, a game that appeals to everyone appeals to no one. You have to appeal to a section of the market when you make a game. That's just how games work. There are different kinds of video games. There's strategy games. There's shooter games. You know, there's massive multiplayer online games. There's all these vastly different games. And you have to go for that market. You have to go for that segment of the market when you develop a game. You can't just make a game that appeals to everyone. This is a trap that I see tons of these publishers, developers falling into is, oh, just make it appeal to everyone. That way it'll be a success even if it's shit. No, you have to make a good game that appeals to a specific target audience. That's how you get a successful game. Again, Baldur's Gate 3. I'll bring it up a million times if I have to. The strict deadline became a recurring problem. The development team would make decisions believing that they had less than a year to release the game, which severely limited the stories that they could tell and the world that they could build. Then the title would inevitably be delayed a few months, at which point they'd be stuck with those old decisions with no chance to stop and reevaluate what was working. At the end of 2022, okay, we're getting there, we're moving through the years. Amid continually dazzling leadership changes, the studio started distributing an alpha build for Dragon Age to get feedback internally and from outside playtesters. According to people familiar with the process, the reactions were concerning. The game's biggest problem, early players agreed, was a lack of satisfying choices and consequences. Previous BioWare titles have presented players with gut-wrenching decisions which allies to save? Oh, which allies to save? I was like, why is that a question mark? Which allies to save? Which factions to spare? Which enemies to slay? Such dilemmas made fans feel like they were shaping the narrative. Historically, a big draw for many BioWare games. Yeah, that's a big aspect of RPG games. You know, you have choices that impact the game. Will cause one character to die, another character to live. Well, you can side with the faction that kills the other faction. You know, good example is this New Vegas. Legion, Mr. House, Yes Man, NCR. All of these, whichever you side with, massively changes how the game plays. But Dragon Age's multiplayer roots limited such choices. According to people familiar with the development, BioWare delayed the game's release again, while the team shoehorned in a few major decisions, such as which of the two cities to save from a dragon attack. But because most of the parameters were already well established, the designers struggled to pair the newly retrofitted choices for players with meaningful consequences downstream. Yeah, makes sense. Stuff like that, I mean, you have to have everything mapped out if you want to make a game like that. In 2023, to help finish Dragon Age, BioWare brought in a second internal team, which was working on the next Mass Effect game. For decades, there would be tensions between the two well-established camps, known for their starkly divergent ways of doing things. That's pretty common, where like different teams will have I don't know, tension isn't the right word for my experience, but they'll be competitive with each other, you know? So, sorry, where was I? There had been tension between the two well-established camps, known for their starkly divergent ways of doing things. BioWare's developers like to joke that the Dragon Age crew was like a pirate ship, meandering and sometimes traveling off course, but eventually reaching the port. In contrast, the Mass Effect group was called the USS Enterprise after the Star Trek ship because commands were issued straight down from the top and executed zealously. I mean, they're really the Mass Effect team is really glazing themselves here, but they released Andromeda, so I don't know what they're talking about. They don't have much of a hill to stand on. As the Mass Effect directors took control, they scoffed that the Dragon Age squad had been doing a shoddy job and begun excluding their leaders from pivotal meetings, according to people familiar with the internal friction. Over time, the Mass Effect team went on to overhaul parts of the game and design a number of additional scenes, including a rich emotional finale that players loved. But even changes that appear to improve the game stoked the simmering rancor inside BioWare, infuriating Dragon Age leaders who had been told that they didn't have the budget for such big, ambitious swings. It always seemed that when the Mass Effect team made its demands in meetings with EA regarding the resources needed, it got its way, said David Gaiter, a former lead writer on the Dragon Age franchise who left before development of the new game started. But Dragon Age always had to fight against headwinds. Early testers and Mass Effect leads complained about the game's snarky tone. I mentioned this earlier. They made it's kind of quippy and snarky because, again, they said they were going to make it a multiplayer game and they wanted to appeal to everyone, so they didn't want it to be dark, even though Dragon Age has always been a dark fantasy RPG game. So, yeah, the writing, the quippy dialogue, the quirky tone, having a transgender character in the game talk about their struggle as a transgender person doesn't really fit in a dark fantasy setting at all. But that all happened and that all got in. It's funny that that's not mentioned in the article. Okay. Sorry about that. Getting back to the article. A style of video game storytelling once ascendant that was quickly falling out of fashion in pulp culture, but had been part of Goldman's vision for the multiplayer game. Yeah, he's referring to the quippy Marvel dialogue. Word that Dragon Age could face the same outcome as Forspoken, a recent title that had been hammered over its impertinent banter, BioWare leaders ordered a belated rewrite of the game's dialogue to make it sound more serious. So now they want to rewrite the entire fucking game. All the dialogue. In the end, the resulting tonal inconsistencies would only add to the game's poor reception with fans. They're just being pulled one way and then they're being pulled back the other by the higher ups. Oh man, I almost feel bad for the people developing this game because it's really, I mean, it is their fault because you look at these writers, a lot of them, you know, they were the ones that put in all this trans stuff. But there's so much else beyond that that could have been a good game. I wouldn't have played it because I don't play games with leftist propaganda in it, and it wasn't subtle, like I said. But there could have been a good game here if they didn't go one way and then the other. A mass layoff at BioWare and a mandate to work overtime depleted morale, while a voice actors strike limited the writer's ability to revise the dialogue and create new scenes. An initial trailer made the next Dragon Age seem more like Fortnite than a dark fantasy role-playing game, triggering concerns that EA didn't know how to market the game. When Dragon Age: The Veilguard finally premiered on Halloween 2024 after many internal delays, some staff members thought there was a lot to like, including the game's new combat system, but players were less impressed and sales sputtered. Yeah, some staff members thought there was a lot to like. Oh, players are going to love this new generic action combat that has no depth and is boring as shit and has no strategy. And people who play Dragon Age games like Origins, which had a ton of strategy and a ton of micromanagement, oh yeah, they'll love this new action slop combat. Crazy how out of touch these people are. But at least the players, like they say here, the players weren't impressed. And sales sputtered. The reactions of the fan base are mixed, to put it gently. Yeah, if it's mixed, that means it's shit. Say Katie, a popular Dragon Age YouTuber. Some, like myself, adore it for various reasons. Others feel utterly betrayed by certain design choices. Following the layoffs and staff reassignments at BioWare earlier in the year, a small team of a few dozen employees is now working on the next Mass Effect. After 3 high-profile failures in a row, questions linger about EA's commitment to the studio. In May, the company relabeled its Edmonton headquarters from a BioWare office to a hub for all EA staff in the area. Historically, BioWare has never been the most important studio at EA, which generates more than $7 billion in annual revenue, largely from its sports games and shooters. Depending on the timing of its launches, BioWare typically accounts for just 5% of EA's annual bookings, according to estimates by Colin Sebastian, an analyst with Robert W. Baird and Company. Even so, there may be strategic reasons for EA to keep supporting BioWare. Single-player role-playing games are expensive to make, but can lead to huge windfalls when successful. Again, look at Baldur's Gate 3. As demonstrated by recent hits like Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, and Baldur's Gate 3, hey, there it is! In order to grow, EA needs more than just sports franchises, said TD Cowen analyst Doug Kreutz. Trying to fix its fantasy-focused studio may be easier than starting something new. Yeah, maybe just let the studio that's made, fantasy role-playing single-player games for like a decade do that. And don't force them to do a multiplayer game and then force them back into making their single-player game. Maybe don't do that. Just let them focus on making their single-player game from the start. Oh, also, get out all the people responsible for top surgery scars, for tops like trans shit and writing in the game, pulling a barb. Whoever wrote that, get rid of them as well. I noticed that wasn't mentioned in the article at all, but that massively contributed to the bad word of mouth of this game. Everyone on YouTube was ragging on it, clowning on it. How could this dialogue get in this dark fantasy game? Again, Dragon Age was a dark fantasy game, and you have a character with a trans character venting about how hard it is for them to be trans, how they're confused. It's like, oh my god, don't put this in this game. But these modern writers, they can't help it. But again, I just had to say something because I noticed that wasn't mentioned in this article at all. And it is Bloomberg, so they probably don't want to get political. But again, that was a massive contributing factor to the bad word of mouth of this game. Alright, so closing out. That said, if they shuttered the doors tomorrow, I wouldn't be totally surprised, Kreutz added. It has been over a decade since they produced a hit. Yep, and that's kind of the story at the end of the day. They haven't produced a hit for a decade. The Veilguard was a massive flop, and are they going to be able to course correct? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think the people responsible for making actual good games, I would guess the people responsible for making Dragon Age Origins, that none of them are at the studio anymore. I would guess none of them, maybe one or two. But the people who actually used to make the good games at BioWare, the talent aren't there anymore. And with the higher-ups constantly pulling them one way or the other, the team maybe could catch a break and try to scrap something together that people might like. Fans of Dragon Age might like, but it's just not going to happen as long as they keep being told to do one thing and then told to do another. But yeah, it's sad. It's kind of sad. Honestly, I obviously want games to succeed. I want games to do well. I want good games to come out that appeal to me. But it just doesn't happen these days. But at least when it doesn't happen, it turns out a lot of other people don't like the game either. And then the studios kind of go under. And this could lead to not just stagnation, but hopefully a revamping, a revitalizing of genres. Maybe new talent, new studios coming in. So, I'm going to try to be optimistic. But, yeah. This was an interesting article. It gave a little more insight into the whole story. Again, I'm bummed that it didn't delve into the whole, very controversial trans stuff. But it is what it is. I'll stop it there. So if you like the video, like it. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel. I'm a new channel, so subscriptions go a really long way. And thanks for watching. Peace.